Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It has been a rough Labor Day weekend in the Trump White House, where officials are absolutely full out freaking out about Thursday night's report in The Atlantic that Trump had characterized Americans who died in war as losers and suckers. Trump himself has spent the past 4 days repeatedly denying the story, marshaling all kinds of people to come forward to knock it down. He insisted today that, quote, only an animal would say a thing like that. The White House trotted out figures like Sarah Sanders, who we know has lied to reporters multiple times, to claim the report isn't true because they were there when Trump didn't say the terrible things he allegedly said. I think they're hoping you don't think about that formulation too much. The main problem for the White House here is that the evidence supporting the story is pretty obvious and clear and almost overwhelming to anyone not inside the Trump reality distortion bubble. The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg reported that Trump canceled a visit to an American military cemetery near Paris back in 2018, partially because he worried his hair would become disheveled in the rain, and partially because he did not respect the American war dead interred there. Quote, in a conversation with senior staff members on the morning of the scheduled visit, Trump said, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." In a separate conversation on the same trip, Trump referred to the more than 1,800 Marines who lost their lives at Belleau Wood as suckers for getting killed. Now, the sources in this story are anonymous, which, anonymous sources are not as good as named sources when you're evaluating something, but it doesn't mean that the claims came in on some anonymous tip line that no one knows who they came from. It means a reporter, in this case, Jeffrey Goldberg, spoke to the people directly, interviewed them, and has agreed not to identify them in the story. Jeffrey Goldberg will be here with me to talk about that in just a moment. His initial story has now been confirmed in part or in its entirety by reporters at numerous other media outlets, okay? Remarkably, a correspondent at Fox News included in that lineup, whom Trump promptly called on the network to fire. Some of those corroborating stories included even more damning details about the president, like this one from the Washington Post. Quote, the president told senior advisors that he didn't understand why the U.S. government placed such value on finding soldiers missing in action because they had performed poorly and gotten caught and deserved what they got. And this from the New York Times, people familiar with Mr. Trump's private conversations say he has long scorned those who served in Vietnam as being too dumb to have gotten out of it, as he did through a medical diagnosis of bone spurs in his heels. Back in 2019, Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen testified that Trump had admitted to faking those bone spurs, telling Cohen, quote, you think I'm stupid, I wasn't going to Vietnam. There's even more evidence that Trump views soldiers as stupid or suckers. Mary Trump, the president's niece, wrote in her recent book that Trump had threatened to disown his eldest son if Don Jr. joined the military. She also says that her own father, Fred Trump Jr., was mocked by Donald Trump because he, Fred Trump Jr., decided to join the U.S. Air National Guard. Quote, my father was frequently ridiculed for his career choices and disparaged for serving our country by both his father and by his brother Donald. Then there's the fact that pretty much none of Trump's top military officials, past and present, are backing the president up. I mean, you really can't find anyone who's stepping forward to defend his character, say he would never say anything like that. They aren't disputing the story. Instead, that's been left to talking heads and former flacks and loyalists. That's maybe not a huge surprise because what Trump allegedly said about all U.S. service members hews very closely to what he said back in 2015 about one particular veteran, Senator John McCain.
He's not a war hero.
He's a war hero.
He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you.
Now, John McCain was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 5.5 years, as everyone knows. Donald Trump avoided that war, had a different experience. In an interview in the 90s, he characterized his efforts to avoid sexually transmitted diseases while sleeping with numerous women as, quote, my personal Vietnam. At an event with union members today, Joe Biden lambasted the president's comments and invoked his own son, Beau, who served in Iraq and then died from a brain tumor in 2015.
Those who have served, risked their lives, even gave their lives to our nation, losers and suckers. These are heroes. I'll tell you something. My Beau wasn't a loser or a sucker. If that's how you talk about our veterans, you have no business being President of the United States of America.
What's being entered into the record here, when you sort of take a step back and look at all the evidence about Donald Trump, shocking, sort of morally offensive. It's not surprising. It's about what we have come to expect. But one big question that keeps pulling on my shoulders